The desert sun blazed overhead when Marcus "Tank" Rodriguez thundered into Copper Valley on his Harley, 10 brothers of the Steel Riders roaring behind him. Tank wasn't looking for trouble, just decent coffee and maybe a slice of whatever pie they were serving at Rosie's Cafe. The cafe clung to Main Street like it had grown there. Chrome counter, faded booths, the smell of fresh coffee cutting through the heat. When 11 bikers walked in, boots echoing on cracked linoleum, the place went silent. Forks froze. Conversations died. Even the sizzle from the kitchen seemed to pause. Tank was used to it. 52 years old, arms sleeved in tattoos, salt and pepper beard to his collarbone. He knew what people saw. A threat. An outlaw. Someone to fear. What they didn't see was the 2 decades he'd spent as an ER nurse, holding the hands of the dying, comforting scared children in the middle of the night. The daughter he'd raised alone after his wife lost her battle with cancer. The stuffed animals he carried in his saddlebag for frightened kids they met on the road. The countless nights he'd sat vigil at hospital bedsides, not because he was paid to, but because no one should die alone. The waitress approached with menus clutched against her chest. Mid-20s, dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, brown eyes that should have been warm but looked haunted instead. Her name tag read Emma, and Tank noticed how she held herself, shoulders hunched inward like she was trying to take up less space in the world. "Morning," she said, voice steady despite trembling hands. "Coffee?" "Please, darling," Tank said gently, his voice softer than anyone would expect from a man his size. "Take your time with those menus. We're not in a rush." That's when he saw it. Purple-yellow bruise along her cheekbone, badly hidden under layers of makeup that couldn't quite conceal the damage. When she reached for the coffee pot, her sleeve slipped. Dark fingerprints circled her wrist like violent jewelry, 5 distinct marks that told a story Tank had seen too many times before. Tank's jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists under the table, but he forced himself to breathe, to wait. Not yet. Emma moved through her shift with practiced efficiency, smiling at customers, refilling cups, her movements mechanical and rehearsed. But Tank watched her flinch at every door chime, her eyes constantly checking the parking lot like a rabbit watching for hawks. She dropped a spoon and jumped at the sound. When an older man at the counter raised his hand to wave her over, she instinctively ducked before catching herself. The other riders noticed too. Snake, sitting to Tank's left, leaned over and whispered, "Boss, you seeing what I'm seeing?" Tank nodded slowly. "Yeah, I see it." When Emma brought their plates, eggs, bacon, hash browns that smelled like heaven, Tank caught her hand, soft as a whisper. "Miss, you look like you took a hard fall. You doing okay?" Emma went white, then crimson. She jerked back, cradling her wrist against her apron. "I'm fine, just clumsy. I tripped coming down my stairs yesterday." "Doors and stairs," Tank said quietly, his voice gentle but knowing. "They get blamed for a lot, don't they? I was a nurse 20 years. I know the difference between falling and being pushed, between an accident and someone's anger." Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them back fast, glancing nervously toward the kitchen. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I need this job. My boss gets here at 9, and if he sees me talking to you—" "Your boss did this?" Reaper, one of the riders, growled, his voice low and dangerous. Her silence answered everything. The way she went pale, the way her breathing quickened, the way her eyes darted to the door. "What's his name?" Tank asked. Emma looked around the cafe, making sure no one else was listening. "Derek Morrison," she whispered. "His father owns half this town. The police chief is his cousin. His uncle is the mayor. I tried reporting it once. Went to the police station with photos, with everything. The officer took my statement, said he'd look into it. She laughed bitterly. That night, Derek showed up at my apartment. He'd gotten a warning call from his cousin. It only got worse after that. She pulled her sleeve down further. I'm saving every penny to leave, but rent is expensive, and I have student loans. I have nowhere to go, no family. I'm trapped. Tank looked at his brothers. 35 years riding together. 35 years protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. They'd raised hundreds of thousands for burn units and children's hospitals. They'd escorted abuse survivors to shelters across 3 states. They'd stood between predators and prey more times than he could count. This was what they did. This was who they were. When's Derek usually here? 9 o'clock sharp. He comes to count the morning receipts and... She paused, swallowing hard. And to check on me, make sure I'm behaving. Tank checked his watch. 7:45. Plenty of time. Then we'll enjoy a nice, slow breakfast, Tank said. He met Emma's terrified eyes with something solid and unwavering. Nobody's going to hurt you again. Not today. Not ever if I have anything to say about it. Just do your work like normal. Let us handle this. You don't understand, Emma said, tears spilling over now. He's dangerous. Last month, a customer complained about him yelling at me. Derek followed that man home, put him in the hospital. Nothing happened to Derek. Nothing ever happens to him. Well, Tank said, leaning back in his booth, maybe it's time something did. The next hour crawled like years. The steel riders ordered more coffee, more pie, more toast, spreading across the counter and 3 booths like they owned the place. They talked quietly among themselves, but Tank noticed they were positioning themselves strategically, blocking exits, creating a perimeter. These men had been in enough situations to know how to control a room. Other customers came and went, shooting nervous glances at the leather-clad men with their patches and scars, but nobody spoke. Nobody complained. There was something in the air, a tension that said something important was about to happen. At 8:58, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up outside, taking up 2 parking spaces. The man who climbed out was tall, lean, expensive sunglasses, and designer jeans, moving like someone who'd never faced real consequences in his life. He had that swagger of inherited power, the walk of someone who believed the world owed him something. That's him, Emma breathed, and pure terror flashed across her face. She actually took a step backward, like her body remembered pain before her mind did. Derek Morrison shoved through the door, already talking loud, already establishing dominance. Emma, where's my morning count? I told you I wanted it ready by 9, not when I have to. He stopped mid-sentence. 11 riders watched him with eyes that had seen the world's ugliest truths, that had witnessed horrors and refused to look away. Can I help you? Derek said, forcing confidence into his voice. But Tank heard the waver underneath, the first crack in the armor. Tank stood slowly, deliberately. 6'5", broad as a truck, with arms that had lifted grown men onto gurneys and held dying soldiers in field hospitals. When he moved toward Derek, the younger man stepped back instinctively, his body understanding the threat before his brain caught up. Just having breakfast, Tank said conversationally, like they were discussing the weather. Your waitress here has been wonderful. Real professional, excellent service. Must be tough, though, working with injuries like that. He gestured at Emma, and every eye in the cafe followed his hand. Derek's face flushed dark red. That's none of your damn business. Emma, get in the back, now. I don't think so, Tank said, and his voice dropped to ice, to something cold and final. Emma's staying right here where we can see her, where everyone can see her. And you and I are going to have a conversation about how men are supposed to treat people. "You don't know who you're messing with," Derek blustered, trying to puff himself up. "My family owns half this town. I could have you arrested for threatening me." "My family," Tank cut him off, gesturing at the riders who'd all stood up now, forming a wall of leather and muscle. "Covers 15,000 miles a year helping people who need it. We work with women's shelters in 40 states. We know lawyers, judges, FBI agents, and enough good cops to make your life very, very complicated. So let's skip the part where you try to intimidate me, because son, I've stared down things a lot scarier than a spoiled brat who hits women." He stepped closer. Derek backed into a table, knocking over a salt shaker. "Here's what happens next, and this isn't a negotiation. You give Emma her final paycheck plus 8 weeks severance. That's $2,000 minimum. You write her a letter of recommendation so glowing she could work at the Four Seasons, and you never contact her again. Not a call, not a text, not driving past her house, not sending friends to check on her. Nothing. You become a ghost in her life. And if I don't?" Derek tried to sound defiant, but his voice cracked like a teenager's. "Then we make phone calls," Tank said softly, and somehow that quiet voice was more terrifying than any shout could be. "See, we're pretty good with social media for old bikers. We've got followers in every state. Pictures tend to go viral. Reputations tend to crumble. Family businesses tend to suffer when people find out the owner's son likes to beat up women half his size. You following me?" Derek looked around the cafe desperately, seeking allies, seeking escape. Every customer watched now. Mrs. Chen from the post office, old Bob from the hardware store, the young couple with their toddler. People who'd known him his whole life. People who'd watched him swagger and bully his way through Copper Valley for years, who'd heard rumors but never had proof. And in their eyes, he saw something that made his blood run cold. They believed the bikers. They were on Emma's side. He saw disgust in their faces, judgment he'd never faced before. "Fine," he muttered, his swagger completely gone now. "Fine, just get out of my restaurant." "Not your restaurant," Tank corrected. "Your daddy's restaurant. And we'll leave soon as you write that check and that letter. Right now. We'll wait." 10 minutes later, Emma stood outside in the parking lot, surrounded by 11 motorcycles, holding an envelope and crying different tears. Real tears, clean tears, the kind that wash away poison. "I can't believe you did that," she said, looking at these men like they were angels. "Nobody's ever stood up for me before. Not my ex-boyfriend who saw the first bruises. Not my co-workers who knew. Nobody. Why would you do this for a stranger?" "Because everyone deserves someone in their corner," Tank said, his voice gentle again. "And you're not a stranger anymore. Now you've got a choice to make. You can stay here in Copper Valley, try to build a life in a town that protected your abuser. Or you can ride with us to Phoenix. We know a woman named Maria who runs a diner there, the Desert Rose. Good woman, pays fair wages, doesn't tolerate any nonsense. You'd have a fresh start, a place where nobody knows your past, unless you want to tell them." Emma looked back at the cafe, at the town that had failed her, then at these rough men with scars and ink and hearts bigger than their reputations. Men who'd shown her more kindness in 2 hours than she'd known in 2 years. "I'll need to pack," she said. "We'll wait," Tank promised. "Take whatever time you need." 3 months later, Tank got a letter forwarded from Phoenix. Inside was a photo. Emma, in a clean apron, at the Desert Rose, genuine smile lighting up her face, bruises gone, fear replaced with something that looked like hope. She was laughing at something off camera, her whole body relaxed in a way she'd never been in Copper Valley. The letter said, "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for reminding me that kindness still exists in this world. I'm taking night classes at community college now, psychology, because I want to help others like you helped me. For the first time in years, I can see a future beyond just surviving. You didn't just save my life that day. You gave it back to me. You changed everything." Tank pinned the photo in his garage next to dozens of others. Faces of people the Steel Riders had helped over the years. A teenage runaway they'd gotten into rehab, a veteran they'd kept from suicide, a family whose house they'd rebuilt after a fire. Each one a reminder that the scariest-looking people sometimes have the biggest hearts. That real strength isn't about how hard you can hit, but about using your power to protect those who can't protect themselves. That evening, as the desert sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, Tank fired up his Harley. Tomorrow they'd ride again, heading north toward Flagstaff. More roads to travel, more people needing someone to stand up for them, more chances to prove that the world wasn't as dark as it sometimes seemed. He thought about Emma's new beginning, about the psychology degree she was working toward, about Derek Morrison, who'd quietly left town 2 weeks after the incident when Tank's friends in the media started asking questions about assault allegations, about how one moment of courage ripples outward in ways you'll never fully know, touching lives you'll never meet. Tank smiled beneath his beard, kicked his bike into gear, and rode into the golden light. Sometimes the best thing you can do is simply notice when someone's hurting and choose to care. Choose to act. Choose to be the person who doesn't look away. Because beneath the leather and chrome and rumbling engines, that's what the Steel Riders were really about. Not the bikes or the freedom of the open road, though those things mattered. It was about family, about standing together, about seeing injustice and refusing to turn your back on it, about being the kind of people who make the world a little bit safer, a little bit kinder, one person at a time. And in a world that could feel cold and cruel and impossibly hard, that was everything.